The sun, a fiery dagger, plunged into the scorched earth of the canyon. Twisted, prickly shadows danced around the sparse creosote bushes, like malevolent spirits guarding a secret. The wind, the desert's exhale, whispered something wicked, carrying grains of sand through the ravines, which pricked the skin like thousands of tiny needles. Here, in the heart of the merciless wasteland, time flowed slowly, sluggishly, like blood spilled on a heated stone. A lone rider, wrapped in a dusty poncho, slowly made his way along the canyon floor. His face, hidden by the wide brim of his hat, seemed carved from granite, as harsh and unforgiving as the desert itself. His name was Eli. He was a fugitive, and the canyon was his final refuge, his shelter from the world. He knew these places as well as his 5 fingers, remembering every turn of the path, every crevice in the rocks, every cave where he could hide from the blazing sun or an enemy's gaze. But even he felt the noose tightening around his neck. Deep down, he knew his days were numbered. A week ago, he'd robbed a bank in the neighboring town, taking a little more than he'd intended. Now they were after him. The sheriff, along with a gang of ruthless men greedy for the reward, were hot on his trail like shadows. They thought they'd cornered him in this cursed canyon, but they didn't know Eli. They didn't know that having grown up in this harsh land, he knew every stone, every path, every trap. Eli stopped his horse near a nearly dried-up stream, faintly glimmering under the scorching sun. He dismounted, his movements deliberate, but filled with a hidden strength. He pulled a flask from the saddle and took several eager gulps. The water was warm, tasting of iron, but it was the only salvation in this hellish heat, where every breath felt like a burn. Carefully surveying the surroundings, he noticed tracks, fresh hoofprints, leading towards a narrow passage between tall cliffs. The sheriff was close, no more than a couple of miles away. He felt not only a chilling fear, but also a long-forgotten emotion, loneliness. Loneliness, which had become his shadow, a faithful companion throughout his life. Eli had become accustomed to it, grown akin to it, but now, with the hunter's steps echoing nearby, it scorched his soul like a merciless fire. He had never been a fan of solitude, but fate rarely cared for his preferences. Eli walked to his horse, stroked its neck, whispering something softly into its ear. The animal seemed to understand him, nodding its head in agreement. Suddenly, she appeared from around the bend, the girl. She sat upon a small mare, her face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, but Eli saw long, unbound hair the color of a raven's wings streaming in the wind. She was completely alone, which struck him as odd. In these wild lands, solitary travelers rarely lingered. Eli tensed, his senses heightened, ready for any danger. He had few friends in the past, and he could trust even fewer. She rode closer, halting the mare just a few steps away. "Good day," a low, raspy voice said. Eli remained silent, unanswering. His gaze was fixed upon her, assessing, watchful. He didn't recognize her. In these parts, there weren't many people he didn't know by sight. "I'm lost," she continued. "Could you possibly point me in the right direction?" Her voice sounded strange, as if its owner was unaccustomed to speaking. Eli hesitated. He really didn't want to involve anyone in his troubles, but refusing help without good reason seemed uncouth. He glanced at the stranger, trying to discern her intentions. "Where do you need to go?" he finally managed, his voice cracking, rough after a long silence. "To the San Pedro River," she replied, a fleeting, unreadable expression in her eyes. "There's a ranch there." Eli nodded, lost in thought. The trail to San Pedro wound through a twisting canyon, but there was another, far more treacherous route, known only to a select few. "I know the way," he said with certainty, "but you should stay away from that place. It's dangerous." He spoke, trying to make his words as serious as possible. "Dangerous?" the girl asked, raising a delicate eyebrow in surprise. Her eyes, the color of a spring sky, seemed to sparkle with curiosity, but a hint of skepticism also lingered within them. "Yes," Eli replied, nodding. "There are some unsavory characters around here." He didn't elaborate, avoiding the details of the various dangers that lurked at every turn. Eli wasn't the type to bare his soul to just anyone. "I believe I'm quite capable of taking care of myself," she retorted, a challenge strung tight in her voice. Eli shrugged, as if to say, "Well, that's your decision." So be it. It was her choice. He'd already warned her. "Then follow me," the man said, turning toward his horse. "But stay close." They set off, slowly making their way along the canyon floor. The wind still howled, whipping at their faces, but they were no longer alone. The silence that hung between them felt heavy, like a massive stone about to fall. Eli felt a scrutinizing gaze upon him. He wasn't used to it, but he tried not to reveal his feelings. After a while, they reached the narrow passage Eli knew about. It was barely wider than his horse and led to a cave, safely hidden from prying eyes. "Stay here," Eli ordered, dismounting his horse. "I'll check if it's safe inside." He stepped into the passage, feeling his heart pounding wildly in his chest. He knew the sheriff was probably somewhere nearby, and any mistake could be fatal. Eli walked through the narrow corridor, feeling the coolness, and found himself in a spacious cave. It was dark, damp, and smelled of mildew and rot. A perfect hiding place. Emerging, Eli gestured for the girl to follow. She hesitated a little, but obediently nudged her horse, heading after him. Once they were inside, Eli set to work, blocking the entrance with enormous boulders, carefully masking them with moss and branches. "What are you doing?" she asked anxiously, genuine worry in her voice. "Providing us with protection," he replied, without turning around. "They won't find us here." He felt her curious gaze sweep across the cave. The gentle light filtering through narrow cracks danced on her face. "You know these places well," she observed. "I grew up here," Eli replied. He wasn't about to divulge his life story, of how he lost his parents at the age of 7, of how he learned to survive in these wild, harsh conditions when he was merely 10 years old. He wasn't one for confessions, preferring instead to keep things bottled up, to guard his secrets fiercely. They spent several hours in the cave, watching the sun slowly descend behind the horizon, painting the canyon in crimson hues. Time stretched, an endless thread, measuring the minutes in silence. Eli remained silent, his gaze fixed on the girl. She also remained silent, but her eyes were fixed on the distance, as if she saw something hidden from his sight. She seemed fragile, almost weightless, but in her posture, in her tense shoulders, there was a hidden strength, a power he sensed but couldn't understand. When darkness descended upon the earth, Eli built a fire, causing the dancing flames to leap upwards. He didn't utter a word, only nodded towards the fire, offering her warmth. The girl silently approached and sat down beside him, her gaze fixed on the dancing tongues of flame. Finally, when the fire was already blazing at full strength, Eli heard her quiet voice. "What is your name?" she asked, finally breaking the prolonged silence. "Eli," he replied, his voice sounding muffled in the morning air. "My name is Sarah," she introduced herself, her voice trembling slightly. The name seemed vaguely familiar to him, as if somewhere, sometime, he had heard it before. But at that moment, he didn't give it any importance, casting aside the persistent thought. He spent a long night, gazing into the dancing flames, listening to every sound, even the smallest rustle, every fleeting shadow lurking in the depths of the cave. With the first rays of dawn, he cautiously emerged from his hiding place. The sun had not yet risen over the horizon, but the air was already filled with the anticipation of warmth. He carefully examined the surroundings, striving not to miss a single detail. Not a soul. The sheriff, apparently, had passed them by. He returned to the gloomy cave, where the fire crackled. Sarah slept, curled up cozily near the smoldering embers. Eli stood over her for a long time, gazing at her sweet, peaceful face before he dared to wake her. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "We must go," he whispered, striving to conceal the tremor in his voice. They emerged from the cave, and a cold, biting wind whipped across their faces. Eli helped Sarah onto the mare, then effortlessly mounted his own horse. "Thank you," she said sincerely, looking him in the eyes. "You're welcome," Eli replied, trying to sound calm, though turmoil churned within him. "It's best if you stay away from me now. I don't want you to get hurt." "I'm not afraid," Sarah stated firmly, defiance echoing in every word and every tone of her voice. Eli remained silent, choosing not to argue. He turned his horse, and with a responsive kick, it moved away from the road, heading away from San Pedro. "Where are you going?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling with sudden worry. "I need to leave," Eli replied, a shadow of determination flickering in his eyes. "And as quickly as possible." He couldn't risk endangering her any longer, couldn't risk her life. She was innocent and shouldn't have to pay for his mistakes. They parted without saying anything truly important to each other, but something had subtly changed within Eli in his perception of the world. He felt something warm, long forgotten, touch his heart. He couldn't define what had awakened inside him, but he sensed deep down that he should stay away from it. Eli descended into the canyon, navigating the narrow trails as if he knew the sheriff would be searching for him there. He knew the hunt would continue, lasting for a long time. But now, he didn't feel alone. This gave him strength. He would fight, he would survive, until even one chance remained. He rode for approximately a few miles when he heard the gunshots. The sound of gunfire seemed very close. He stopped his horse, listening warily to the echoes that reverberated through the canyon. The shots rang out again, shattering the evening silence. Something inside him broke when he realized it was an ambush. The sheriff was undoubtedly waiting for him, having chosen the right moment. His heart hammered, and thoughts raced through his mind. Wheeling his horse around, Eli dug his spurs into its flanks, sending the steed thundering back towards the danger. It didn't matter to him at all if he was caught. Only one thing was important now, saving Sarah. When he reached the spot where they'd parted just a few minutes ago, a horrifying scene unfolded before him. The sheriff and his men, no fewer than 6, had surrounded Sarah. She was desperately fighting back, firing her revolver, but her strength was clearly failing. Rage and despair surged within Eli. Without wasting a single second, he drew his revolver and, like a wild beast, charged into the attack, screaming in fury. He fired with deadly accuracy, sending one bandit after another into oblivion. Rage churned within him, fueling his fury, and he moved like the devil himself, incarnate in human form. The sheriff, realizing the full horror of what was happening, tried to stop the carnage, firing at Eli. The bullet struck his shoulder, piercing his shirt and lodging in his flesh, but Eli seemed to feel no pain. He continued to shoot until the last of the bandits fell, struck down by a precise shot. Sarah, watching the scene, breathed a sigh of relief. She was wounded, but alive, which was already a miracle. When the battle subsided, a stifling silence descended. Dozens of bodies littered the ground, covering it in dust. Eli, bleeding and staggering, approached Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice trembling with worry. "Yes," she whispered, gasping for breath. "Thank you. You saved me." Elijah offered a barely perceptible smile. He rarely allowed himself to smile, but now a shy yet sincere smile touched his lips. It softened his face, transforming his stern features. Suddenly, a man descended rapidly from the hilltop. He moved with a swift, almost running gait, his face hidden in the deep shadow cast by the wide brim of his hat. "Sarah!" "Hello," he called out loudly. "I demand to know," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "What in God's name has happened here?" Eli flinched, recognizing the ranch foreman, the very place they were headed with Sarah. His heart clenched painfully. "Father!" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. The man, broad-shouldered and tanned, was instantly beside them. His eyes seemed to flash with both anger and concern. "You're wounded. Who dared to harm you?" he exclaimed, his lips turning white. "Sheriff," Sarah replied, her voice trembling, "and this man, he saved me." Sarah's father, a tall man with a weary gaze, slowly turned his eyes toward Eli. His face showed a mixture of disbelief and something else, more complex. "You," he began, his voice heavy. His voice, "You are Eli?" Eli nodded, struggling to contain his emotions. He felt the past, like a shadow, engulfing him, squeezing his heart in a vice. He knew retribution would arrive sooner or later. "I know what you did," Sarah's father stated, his gaze hardening. Eli exhaled, bracing himself for the worst. "You robbed the bank." "Yes," Eli replied, his voice raspy, as if he'd uttered those words for the first time in many years. "But I didn't do it for myself." Eli avoided explanations, declining to make excuses. "I know what you did," Sarah's father repeated, his voice trembling. "Sarah, she is my only daughter. I cannot allow her to suffer because of you." Eli nodded, accepting the sentence. He understood Sarah's father. He hadn't expected mercy. A grim picture already formed in his mind. Prison, and perhaps even the gallows. Sarah's father slowly drew a pistol from beneath his cloak. "I must do this," he said, his voice firm and resolute. Eli squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, as if steeling himself. He felt ready, knowing he deserved harsh punishment for his transgressions. Suddenly, Sarah, like a guardian angel, stood between them, blocking the way. Her slender shoulders tensed, and her eyes pleaded for mercy. "No, Father," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Please don't do this." "Sarah, move aside at once," her father roared, his face contorted with rage. "No," Sarah repeated, her resolve astonishing. She stood firm, a small statue prepared to weather a storm. "He saved my life, and I know he deserves more." She turned slowly towards Eli, searching his face. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly, striving to keep her voice steady. "Why did you rob the bank?" Eli met her gaze. In her eyes, he saw not just questions, but a glimmer of understanding, mixed with sympathy. This gave him strength. "I had to help someone," he began, carefully choosing his words. He was in a very difficult situation. He needed $20,000, or his life would be ruined. I couldn't stand by. I had to give him the money. "You know you committed a crime," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes," Eli replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I know. But you are a good person," she continued, pleading in her eyes. "You helped me. You saved my life. You do not deserve death." She inhaled deeply, turned towards her father, and advanced, her long skirt sliding across the stone floor. "Father, please let him go," she begged. "He is not dangerous." He seemed nothing like he truly was. Sarah's father was in a state of turmoil. Thoughts swirled in his head. He didn't know what to do. His gaze shifted from his daughter to Eli, then wandered over the lifeless bodies scattered around. He felt lost, crushed by the weight of what had happened. "I don't know," he breathed, his voice sounding hollow and weary. "I absolutely don't know what to do." Sarah stepped towards him, her palm resting on his arm, squeezing it in an encouraging gesture. She raised her eyes to his, filled with hope and a plea. "Listen to me, Father," she said quietly but firmly. "He committed a terrible act, it's true, but he isn't a bad person. Please, give him a chance." "Give him another chance." Sarah's father sighed heavily, the sound seeming to fill the entire room, infusing it with the bitter taste of disappointment. He lowered the pistol, his hand trembling, but the determination in his eyes remained. "All right," he said, his voice muffled but firm. "I'll let him go. But everything will be paid for. He will be responsible for what he's done. He will work off his debt." Eli, standing before him as if frozen, breathed a sigh of relief, as if an unbearable burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He hadn't expected such a turn of events at all. He knew he faced a difficult task ahead, a heavy labor that would stretch for many months. Sarah's father, grimacing but not changing his mind, led them to his old ranch, where they were to serve their sentence. There they administered first aid. The wound was severe, but by the will of fate, he survived. Sarah's father, an elderly man with kind eyes and wrinkles etched onto his face by time, took Eli in. He gave him shelter on his ranch and offered him work so he could begin a new life. Eli worked tirelessly, knowing he needed to atone for his past mistakes. Sarah often came to him, bringing food, bandaging his wounds if they hadn't yet healed, and simply talking. She told him about her dreams, about how she saw her life in the future. Eli listened attentively, and a new, unknown feeling arose in his heart. A feeling, like a spring stream, gathered strength with each passing day. It was love. He didn't know if he deserved it, but with all his heart, he longed to be near. He wanted to turn his life upside down, to become better, to change for her. He needed her. One evening, when the sun, painting the sky in crimson hues, was already sinking towards the horizon, they sat on the porch of the ranch. Sarah nestled close to Eli, and he looked at her, gently stroking her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin intertwine with the beat of his heart. "Eli," she whispered, her voice soft as the whisper of the wind. "I love you." Eli froze, his heart ready to leap from his chest. He couldn't believe his ears. Do "Do you love me?" he breathed, his voice barely a whisper from the intensity of his emotions, he asked. "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice trembling with the depth of her feelings. "I love you. I always have." Eli gently pulled her close, embracing her. His fingers tenderly touched her cheek before he leaned in for a kiss. It was a hesitant, almost shy kiss, yet it held so much tenderness, so much excitement and hope. They spent several happy years together, like one long, beautiful moment. Elijah, strong and self-assured, worked hard on the ranch, while Sarah, radiant and caring, was always by his side supporting him. Their life flowed in peace and harmony, filled with mutual love and respect. Elijah felt like the happiest man on earth, basking in this quiet but boundless happiness. But the past persistently reminded him of itself, like a bad dream. One day, an unexpected guest appeared at the ranch, where Elijah was trying to find peace. It was an old acquaintance, a shadow from his gloomy past. His face, etched with wrinkles like a map of years lived, expressed a harsh reminder of the deeds of long ago. He had come to bring Elijah back to what he so desperately tried to forget: debts and retribution. "You owe me," the guest rasped, his voice seemingly crackling with anger. "You must pay." Eli understood with a painful clarity that he was now destined to return to the life he had fled for so long. He didn't want it, he resisted with all his heart, but he had almost no choice. He couldn't allow Sarah, his beloved Sarah, to suffer. This decision wasn't easy, but clenching his teeth, Eli made it. He approached Sarah, his eyes full of both pain and resolve. He said goodbye to her, trying to hide the storm raging within his soul beneath a mask of calm. Eli promised to return, but knew this vow might never be fulfilled. He didn't reveal the truth to her, but she felt it with all her heart. He left, leaving only silence behind, and no one ever saw him again. Sarah lived a long life, filled with happiness. She always held the image of Eli in her memory, but never allowed hope to diminish, believing in his return. Decades passed. Sarah had already bent towards old age when one day, sitting on the old, creaking porch of her house, she saw a lone rider in the distance. He approached slowly, his face hidden by a hat pulled down over his eyes. When the rider came very close, Sarah's heart stopped. She recognized him. It was Eli. He dismounted, his movements slow but confident, and headed towards her. His face was furrowed with wrinkles, like a map of the years he had lived, but deep within his eyes, that very spark that Sarah had once loved so passionately still danced. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "Eli," she answered, and tears, bitter and salty, betrayed her, welling in her eyes. She felt her heart clench with a piercing mix of pain and joy. He silently sat beside her, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining. The touch, so familiar and achingly dear, resonated throughout her entire being. "I'm back," he whispered, and an eternity echoed in those simple words. They sat in silence, their palms tightly clasped. Eli had returned, but it seemed he had passed through the millstones of time, emerging as a completely different person. He had atoned, found freedom, and shed the heavy burden of the past. He had returned to her, yet both understood their lives would never be the same. They had met to say goodbye, to bid farewell to each other, perhaps forever. Their love had seemed eternal, but fate had other plans, separating them. Eli departed, leaving behind everything he held dear, and never returned. Sarah, however, lived out her life, cherishing his memory in her heart, nurturing a hope and love that warmed her even in the severest winters. The story of their feelings became a legend, whispered by the wind, carried through the canyons like an elusive phantom, reminding everyone that even in the harshest lands, where merciless laws prevailed, there was still room for love and hope. And that even a man who had stumbled, cornered, could find redemption if he met someone who believed in him, who saw not just a criminal, but a soul yearning for warmth and understanding.